So welcome to this, the first of a weekly series of faculty development sessions hosted by the Department of Family Medicine and Primary Care in collaboration with our very own Faculty Center for Health Sciences Education. It's a pleasure to be partnering with the Center for Health Sciences Education on this particular initiative for both the importance of the collaboration from a department level with our centers in the school, and not least with the Health Sciences Education, the Center for Health Sciences Education. I'd like to kick off this series of Tuesday sessions with just setting the scene for some of our future discussions in this space, to allow us to engage together around development of ourselves as faculty in the health sciences education space. And no surprise that to many of you, but COVID-19 is of very thematic for us, of particular relevance to our discussions currently. So it's in the context of that I'm going to be making a few comments around setting exactly that scene for further sessions. So to remind you that the faculty, this particular sessions of professional learning within the context of faculty development, going to be looking at three specific areas. First of all, a learning workshop. Secondly, Tech Tuesdays. And thirdly, the Health Professionals Education Journal Club. The learning workshop is of this nature, in which we're going to engage as a collective, discuss, make some comments, ask some questions, engage together as a group around the topic of the day. Tech Tuesdays are those that we're going to focus on with regard specifically exploring the technology for learning and teaching. We all know that there have been many changes with respect to us as a department, as a school of clinical medicine, and as a faculty and beyond. And then lastly, the Health Professionals Education Journal Club, in which we'll be speaking to specific articles that will be presented beforehand, and that we'll be looking to, with a specific presenters, be looking to engage together. So just as a reminder, of course, these sessions, while specifically set up by the Department of Family Medicine, Primary Care, and the Center for Health Sciences Education within the faculty, are very much open to everybody within the faculty and beyond. These are some examples of our first sessions. Myself just providing an introductory session today, and then Tech Tuesdays following. Yanis and Shahetso are going to be looking at engaging with us. I'll follow with another session specifically around COVID-19 and assessment again. But then such diverse topics as medical humanities, writing as thinking, back to the Tech Tuesdays of using Google Docs for collaboration, and then the third pillar of health sciences education, health system sciences. I must remind colleagues as well that what we will be doing is looking to the clinical space as well, or teaching, training, assessment, curriculum, assessment of achievement of competencies and learning outcomes in the clinical space. And we'll be looking at such tools as workplace-based assessment, e-portfolios, and then the more broad but such critical concepts as service learning, authentic learning, deep and meaningful learning in the clinical space and beyond. So yes, from 1600 to 1700 every Tuesday, we're going to be engaging in these three different areas of learning workshops, Tech Tuesdays, and health professionals education. And I'd be delighted if you could spread the word far and wide for those who A, want to engage in these sessions, but of course B, who want to suggest particular topics that we can engage on within each of these three different formats of professional learning, of faculty development. I must also just note that we have set up and we're piloting specific faculty development sessions within the peripheral extended academic platform. namely through our engagement with those joint appointees, those clinicians on the platform in each of our now 7, really, if one looks at it, academic health complexes across 3 provinces, namely Mpumalanga, Northwest Province, and Gauteng Province, of course, where we want to have specific focus for the joint appointees and the clinicians on the platform to develop them, to offer them the opportunity to develop as faculty. We're likely to marry and merge these 2 sessions, this one on a Tuesday and others, and those particular sessions at some point in the year, but we'd like to start off with this particular engagement within faculty, established faculty, and that is as something of an incubation box, perhaps, is a phrase we can use to develop joint faculty on the broader platform within our clinical spaces. So I also just want to reflect very briefly on the fact that, you know, much is going to be made of the COVID-19 pandemic for where it has taken us in the area of teaching and learning, of assessment, of health sciences education in general. And I just want to qualify all of our comments and all of our inputs with a reflection that really, yes, there's this silver lining, but without question, we need to be respectful of those who have truly suffered because of COVID-19. COVID-19 is a pandemic for the disruption that it's caused, has then certainly brought about innovation and progress. But it is with a true sense of humility that we're setting up these discussions, in that we are again and again going to be referencing throughout the year COVID-19 and where it's left us the space to move forward, to press the fast forward button, to put it that way. So just to note that, please, colleagues, and that this is really to our youngsters on the platform and the clinical spaces and in many other areas that we dedicate this online series in terms of being our leaders of tomorrow. So the first question that I would like to be just reflecting on a little bit is if we are looking to be innovating, as the discussion, as the point that was made around in the introductory slide around, are we introducing the new? Yes, we're introducing the innovation, most certainly. Are we throwing the old out with the new? Not necessarily. But with respect to progress and engagement in the health sciences education space, within our faculty, within our school, where is it that we start? Now, I'm reminded of Big's constructive alignment in this regard, and that does it really matter where we start? Should we start with our curriculum, our syllabus, our learning and objectives? Should we start with teaching and learning activities in our spaces? Should we start with our assessment methods and feedback within that context? Because all do need to align. So if we do start with, we look at the big picture and we say to ourselves, well, let's start with any one of those 3, and then be sure that the alignment between in the other 2 areas is appropriate. So from that perspective, perhaps in looking at the big picture of what COVID-19 has indeed taught us, we could start anywhere. But I'm mindful that, and this is a framework that's indeed referenced in the video that I asked you to have a look at, and I'm going to reference that video now, and that's going to form the structure of our discussion. But this is a framework from one of the papers that I'm going to be speaking to, for a framework for good assessment that has both been looked at in the context of the Ottawa Conference, and indeed as well the AMI frameworks that have been put out over the last few years. But what is a good assessment in terms of single assessments? And yes, I think we've heard, many of us, validity and coherence, reliability, feasibility, equivalence, but it's really for number 6, the catalytic effect of assessments, that I choose now to focus on assessments as being a a sort of stake in the ground that we can look to our assessments, and it's from there that our teaching methods and our syllabus and achievement of our learning outcomes can then follow. Not follow sequentially necessarily, but just as a starting point. Assessments is perhaps a good place to start. And so it's within that context that I want to use one of the frameworks that Richard Fuller of the University of Liverpool uses to try to get his head around, as I ask that we do in this session, assessments. And what is it that we can look to? What is the big picture? What is the framework that we can work within to understand essentially as to how we can move forward? Now, Dr. Fuller speaks to understanding a crisis response framework and understanding crisis response measures within that. Now, the Royal Society of Appreciation of the Arts in the UK has done some work around this particular framework, looking at if you have a crisis such as COVID-19, during that crisis, you're going to be engaging in certain activities. Post-crisis, you need to look to reflect on where you are at, but essentially for there being certain temporary measures, recognizing that there's certain obsolete activities that a crisis then brings us to cease, to stop, but they're innovative measures that are certainly coming out of a crisis such as COVID-19. But lastly, there are also paused activities that I think we are pausing for COVID-19, but then we're looking to potentially restart for their inherent value. And I'd like to use this framework for us to be engaging today around where is it that we as a faculty, as a school, as departments, what is it that we are, to put it in another way, what are we going to let go? What are we going to end? What are we going to amplify, and what are we going to restart? And I suggest that this is a decent enough framework by which we can get our heads around a little bit where we are at with respect to COVID-19 and the changes that it's brought about. It's at this point that I also, just if I may segue just to flag a particular webinar series that we're about to start in the next month or so around dreaming disruption. And as a Department of Family Medicine and Primary Care, in collaboration with the Adler Museum and other partners, we'll be kicking off a space in which we can really discuss and engage around disruption and what that truly means. And how is it that we can take advantage of, that we cannot be opportunistic A, and we can be optimistic B, about how is it that disruption can improve upon our engagements around our practice, around the very reasons why we get up in the morning to be health science educationalists, principally in the clinical spaces, but also, of course, in the online and blended learning space. But do traditional healers, for example, in our collaboration with them, are we able to bring, for example, improvements with respect to being slightly disruptive about our engagement with such valuable partners as traditional healers, and the many other ways in which we might be able to disrupt and therefore bring improvement. But back to today's discussion, and that is that, and this again is a quote from the video that I asked, the symposium, the AMI 2020 symposium that I asked you to, that I shared with you. And that is that this is one quote that comes from Richard Fuller in his presentation, that the problems that were there pre-COVID are still problems now. It's not as if they've gone away. And we need to reflect on those as well. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to turn to the video itself, and I'm going to split in the the video, I'd like to play different parts of the video, and I'd like us to stop at certain points, and I'd like to just pick up on a discussion around these different areas of what to let go, what to amplify, what potentially to restart, and just have a discussion around, as a collective, have a discussion around our context and our experience and our reality, which may in many ways be similar to that Richard Fuller speaks about in terms of the University of Liverpool. But there may be other aspects that you colleagues can bring to the discussion for us to collectively think about. So with that, allow me to engage. Now, to let go or to restart is where I'm going to start this video. It's a little bit further in the video from the beginning, but that's because I've spoken to that framework with which Dr. Fuller speaks to. So I'm going to let the video run and around this particular issue of decisions of what to let go and to restart. I'm then going to pause, and I'm going to ask you, if you would please, to just reflect on what has been spoken to in this video, and how it might, what questions it has evoked in yourselves for around these particular areas within this framework that I've chosen to frame our discussion around. I'm going to, just before, sorry, I'm going to reshare because I think I have to make sure that the video plays with sound. Just give me a moment. Right.
Practice. What things do we want to let go of? What things do we want to?
Okay. Can I just confirm that you can see A, the video, and B, hear it?
Yes, we can.
Thank you.
So let's think about old practice. What things do we want to let go of? What things do we want to restart? To what extent do we want to return to business as usual? The whole mechanics of assessment. So you can see here a whole assessment warehouse with a practice that I think has become increasingly adversarial. So can we take a real fresh look at that? Can we audit our existing practice against good practice guidelines and make some brave decisions about what we can retire and not? At a time of change and crisis, I think what we've also learned is a need to actually take decisions about what we can defer or displace or even change and replace. So in doing that, we need to match our assessment thinking to the needs of curricula, our learners and patients, because a huge amount of change and disruption is going on alongside us, and we need to get out of that assessment silo. And we've seen some great practice trying to align that. It's about keeping agile in this ongoing crisis. And I think asking these very, very critical questions about the timing and the need and the value of some of what we do. And in doing so, as we move forward, let's not forget about some of the really, really great practice that's out there. It may have disappeared under everybody's radar because of all the change with COVID, but journals and conferences have put out some fantastic work looking at understanding assessment systems in much more detail, and shamelessly highlighting papers I've read and really enjoyed, looking at portfolios and particularly understanding how we can engage learners more in terms of taking ownership of assessment and doing better out of portfolios. Some really interesting work that I think for me, some very fresh insights into why some of the problems of the OSCE are so and what that might mean for the future. as well as more contemporary work looking at the use of media and technology within some established assessment systems. And don't forget that this is the year of the Ottawa conference, and in fact we're looking forward to 3 new consensus updates in relation to performance assessment, in relation to programmatic assessment and technology enhanced assessment. So lots of great practice that is the core of our assessment business. What about things that we...
Okay. So, can you hear me? I think my mic is still off, still on. I beg your pardon. Yes, I think so. Yes. So just to reflect a little bit on this, before we come to things to the next section. This Richard Fuller speaks of some practices in assessment that have become rather adversarial. He uses the phrase adversarial, and that we need to make some brave decisions in the assessment of our students, and in terms of specifically, what to let go and what to move away from. And I wonder if we could have some comments on what are the brave decisions that we need to be taking within our assessment of our students. And I wonder if anyone's got some comments on that. I'm going to just go back to seeing if I can see some hands raised. And what is it that you feel are those adversarial issues that we need to be looking at throwing out? Stephen.
Hi, Prof. Cooke, and good afternoon, everyone. I know that we've spoken about this before, and perhaps you could shed more light on it, but the issue of these extremely high stakes exams in the context of high stakes exams. And I think that image of that shown in the video is quite telling, of course, that there's like this factory of assessment that I guess positions students learning or takes the value of what a student's learning and puts it into one major form of assessment, and how to maybe rethink that into kind of that programmatic assessment that he speaks about later in the video. That's just a thought.
So thank you. So we do keep to a particular formula with regards to our assessment, which is, and it's time to sort of start thinking out the box a little bit. Aviva?
Sure. So, I mean, I have to say one of the bravest things we've done is look more at workplace-based assessments and increase the weighting of that. Just coming purely from old school and medicine background, is we used to OSCEs and high stakes exams. And for me, it was a huge leap to then look at more programmatic assessment and workplace-based assessment. And it's also a leap of trust. They were talking about trust also. Is that actually going to show the competency of our students? Are we doing the right thing? I don't know. I think we've just taken this leap and only time will tell. So
let me allow me to share or to go into a little bit more the content, or the what we can take from the one of the specific papers that Richard Fuller spoke of, and that's, if I can go back a little bit in the video, and that is let's see if it comes. That's the Norsini paper. Now, this Norsini et al. Is an interesting is an interesting paper, because specifically what this is about is that there was a framework of what makes a good assessment that was put together within the context of the AMY framework, or in 2010, if I recall, or 2011. And in 2018, Norsini, in fact, was one of the authors, or part of that consensus group. And the 2018, they then revisited it. And what was interesting about that is that the slide that I showed you previously about was their framework for what makes a good assessment. So is it reliable? Is it valid? Is it feasible? To conduct that assessment. Now, the difference between that back what 8 or 9 years ago, and this consensus statement around what what makes a good assessment, is they looked at single assessments in 2011, and in 2018 they realized that they need to look at assessment systems. And by assessment systems, they needed to look at all the different assessments from all sorts of different angles in the context of the systems that provide for those assessments. So we can't just look at an OSCE. We can't just look at the validity of an MCQ or a reliability of an MCQ. We must look at the entire system. That speaks to the relationship between all of the different parties. It speaks to, Aviva, the trust that is in place between assessor and assessee, assessor and student. It speaks to the relationship between the assessor and the student, and how we have to be far more nuanced in our approach to assessments as a system within the context of everything about it and around it that makes for a good assessment. Programmatic assessment, Stephen, programmatic assessment is seen as, in its simplified form, as an assessment system. But it's much deeper than that, as the paper reflects on. That it's much more about looking at the system of assessment from all sorts of different angles, for the players involved, for the timing of assessments, for the scheduling of assessments, and for the relationships amongst the different parties. So I encourage you to look at this particular paper and the fuller paper that is spoken to a little bit later, that timing, value, and approach that is critical to understanding the value of assessments for ourselves. Okay, so let's continue and just look at a couple of other points to raise. You see, there's the trust and control there, that paper there that Fuller speaks to. Because that trust and control, they looked at programmatic assessment, Stephen. They looked in this paper, and they recognize that it's a real balance between trusting students, trusting assessors, and having the control as well. And it's two opposite ends of the spectrum. Because what happened in that paper is they're saying, look, teachers want, when they're doing programmatic assessment, so if they've got multiple small stakes assessments that build up small pixels of the student's competence, as opposed to one picture, snapshot picture, as in your high stakes assessment at the end of a rotation, rather to allow for the trust, to allow for the in the engagement between student and assessor. And they found that the teachers in the interviews, in the focused interviews that they did this, the trainers were either on the one extreme, they were using the experiences as a concept of learning to push the learning of the students, but at the other end, they were doing it as a concept of accounting, as an accountability. and a reflection on whether they as learners are, I beg your pardon, as teachers, are being held to account themselves for what the student knows. And one falls into that trap of those two extremes, as opposed to trying to balance the two. So let's continue and have, hopefully this will lead to further insights from being shared by our group.
What about things that we might want to perhaps let go of that we've used short term? Well, I think we can take a critical look at many of those things. Before we pop them back in the cupboard, let's think about whether they have longer term value, because I think we have learnt a lot of things about our learners. I think communicating with them has probably been better now than ever before. We've had to work much harder to explain and to support them at times of uncertainty. As we've moved on to online, I think there has been some absolutely fascinating perspectives from students and faculty about understanding what cheating is and some of our fears and concerns, which have driven sometimes quite interesting practices and behaviours. For me, it's remembering also that as we move online, medical education is not an island in an empty sea. We're surrounded by lots of other people who are grappling with these same issues about online testing and academic good practice. So let's understand and share some of those lessons from elsewhere. And I think an overriding message from many, and I think Trudy Roberts's Amy webinar really struck home for this, about the need to rebuild a culture of trust around assessment. What's it made us think about in relation to our colleagues? Well, I would say that we have seen an incredible amount of creativity and collegiality, and this has been one of the most exciting things to date about some of these responses. We've looked at a very brave new world for the OSCE. We've developed some great ways of actually identifying, pooling, sharing good quality resources in terms of great assessment and teaching practice. For example, the really good stuff approach via medical education. And alongside that, we know that our faculties have had to develop huge new skills or very rapid upskilling around technology. I don't see that going away quickly at all. So really let's get behind this and make this a long-term plan. And we've learned a lot about our institutions. Traditionally, we're used to working in institutions that feel very, very slow. We often see the glacier accelerating past us as we wait to get things done. Well, we've actually seen that people have been able to work much more flexibly and with greater agility to effectively keep the show on the road. And some of these personal and institutional accounts have been really helpful. That said, I think it's important to pause. And this isn't just about reporting change. This is a really interesting editorial from Advances that challenged me the first time I read it. But actually, when I sat down and thought and reread, because I'm now at the stage of life where I think I need to do that, it really struck home about the importance of underpinning some of this change experience with really good quality research-informed practice. But as we face a global crisis with COVID, there's a real opportunity to extend our scholarship from more traditional approaches to looking at what assessment is, to actually thinking about systems, communication, and the economics and the finance of how we fund assessment going forwards. What is our return on investment in some of the models that we use? I think there's a real opportunity and a critical need to underpin some of this with good scholarship. Well,
okay. Allow me to then just return to some of these interesting points that Richard Fuller makes. Excuse me. And I wanted to ask specifically about any thoughts on this culture of trust and the cheating context, or the prevalence of, and if we're introducing online assessments in a particular shape and form, as to whether we are having to, not only in the context of online assessments, but we are having to build a culture of trust. And how is it? Does it exist? Is there a culture of trust in our context? And And if there isn't, how do we build it? If there is an element of it, how do we amplify that and try to build it around the trust the trust around our students, between our students and our faculty. And I wonder if there could be that people have some comments on that with respect to the element of trust. Do students, is it a challenge? Is it not? Do students at the moment in the Faculty of Health Sciences trust us? And therefore, if they do, then great. But if they don't, then surely any form of assessment we put in place is going to be challenged. Does anyone have any comments on that? Aviwe.
Afternoon to everyone. I find this conversation to be very interesting. I think students do not trust the assessor. You know, it relates to the whole power dynamics, where they almost feel like we're out to get them with their marks. And I've observed this because when we go through some of their assessments in the past, they will say, okay, what was the answer supposed to be? And they'll say, but I'm learning this in the clinical area. What does BCMP or the university wants us to say? And that's almost said with like an attitude or without an understanding of, but do you understand what the answer is to this question? They almost feel like we're on the opposite fence and we're trying to catch them out. So I don't think that students trust us. And I think it would be beneficial if we could gain their trust, so that they can understand that we're trying to improve their learning and we're trying to help them. Basically, we're on the same side as the students. But how the culture of how they came about to not trust their assessors, I don't know where that comes from in education in general. I'm not sure. So we need to almost undo that and try
just to push you a little bit, if I may. So I suggest, if I may, with all sense of humility, that you are take Aviwe Mgobozi versus Richard Cooke, and I'd suggest that you're much more in touch with the students than I am. And how do we build that trust, Aviwe? What could we do? What does it take, do you think?
I think
in terms of assessments, perhaps, yeah.
Yes, I think transparency would be number one, where we really try and communicate the system and the assessment plan, the ins and outs, like from the way that we've designed the assessment, the aim of the assessment, why the assessment is in the way that it is, and that students need to be a part of that. So I think we need to maybe be open with our students and also explain and spend more time just creating meaning and understanding around assessment. I don't think they fully understand enough. It's always about points for them. It's about marks. It's about the quantity, not so much where we're trying to get them.
So on the one hand, I'm hearing, Stephen mentioned earlier the reduction in the high stakes assessment, but perhaps that's not necessarily going to be the vehicle by which we build trust. If we have many more low stakes assessments, people could still find those untrustworthy. But I hear you in terms of the student involvement and the student co-creating some of our assessment practices, or at least being transparent about what we're doing and what the meaning and understanding, to quote you. Thank you. Stephen?
Thanks, Prof, and thanks, Aviwe. I think a lot of what you've just said, Aviwe, is what has been going through my mind too, around transparency in relation to assessment and how we communicate our assessments to students. We had our first, Catherine was part of this, we had our first a real-time asynchronous session with our students after 3 weeks of our course running. And we opened up the session by saying that a university is an academy where people come together to build collegiality and to share knowledge. And we encourage the students to see themselves as co-constructors of that knowledge. And we try to break that divide between teacher and student, and rather talk about, a facilitator who is learning through the process of facilitation at the same time. Maybe that sounds a little bit airy-fairy, but it was, it's just to say to the students, listen, that we're part of this together. And when Fuller says that, our communication with students has really increased, it's because we understand a lot of, I think, what students are going through. And we are much more in their lives on platforms such as WhatsApp, or, we have to be to really just to check in on our students. And so to do that also, they have to feel like they can open up and say, listen, things are not going well, or I'm having problems. And to say to them, well, the only way we can really assist you or facilitate your learning is through open communication. And that takes a level of trust too. I think they've inherited this maybe concept of teacher as with this power dynamic that Aviva mentions, as all powerful, omnipotent, or omniscient, or whatever, and that they feel they can't speak on equal terms with us. And we also have our own kind of life issues that we're trying to deal with. And I think there needs to be a division. You really have to separate work from home, but those divisions are blurring a little bit. And Yannis, who's on the call, also has been talking about this a bit. He's saying there are ways that we can increase the kind of visibility and transparency around our assessment by having video briefs where we unpack, what the tasks are, and we talk through the process of the assessment. It's not just a question of assessing a competency at a certain point. It's saying, well, actually, there's a reason why we assess this at this point in time, and that it's not about necessarily achieving brilliantly, because it's through your errors that you also learn. And where people feel really let down when they've done poorly on an assessment, they feel that's a reflection of themselves as beings, as people. And actually saying, well, actually, this is an opportunity to learn. Anyway, I'm rambling again, Richard. I'll just stop there.
Not at all, Stephen. Thank you. Well, let's hear from Yannis and your comments to build on that.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, so I was thinking about what you mentioned about trust, and it's definitely a very, very challenging concept. Definitely what Aviwe said, that students bring it, and Stephen, that students bring it from high school, in terms of that we still take a teachers-centered approach in terms of this, the teacher standing in front of the class teaching. So we don't expose our students to this relationship in terms of being co-creators and being able to the other thing is bringing in authentic assessment, where we give them something to apply, where they actually have to critically think and apply what they're going to learn. We constantly assess them in terms of exams and MCQs and so forth, where it's exactly the same way that they were assessed in high school. So that relationship has not changed. And I think the framework that you shared in the beginning of the session in terms of innovation, about innovating, using the space to innovate, is maybe to think about cultural transformation, about the relationships that we build with our students, and also, like Aviwe mentioned, about transparency, bringing that, being more transparent transparent about our processes and so forth. But then in terms of cheating as well, the thinking about open book assessments and changing our assessment practices, because that also will lead to more trust in terms of not assessing in the same way that they were assessed in high school, but actually letting them apply what they've learned. Yeah, but I think there's a lot more to that than just that, but yeah.
No, thank you very much. And Shira, some comments from you, and you're very welcome.
Thanks, Richard. I'm sorry for appearing late. You know what kind of a day I've been involved in today.
I do.
So, yeah, this is such a lovely conversation, and I really applaud that you've got this up and running, and thanks for including all of us. The discussion that I've been hearing so far is very positive with regard to our introspection, because as Aviwa says, I think our students don't trust us because they think we're out to get them. And so that's a relationship that we need to learn on. And you've been giving good examples of how to unpack what assessment is and why we do it when we do it. And that's one way. But I think the other way we have to think about is that we don't trust our students, not with regard to cheating, but with regard to their own learning. Because I've often heard lecturers say something like, if I haven't said it in class, then they won't know what it is I mean, or something like that. So developing programs like Stephen and Catherine have been involved in is giving challenges to students where there's not one right answer, and where allowing them the element of effort gives them the self-esteem in a way to kind of approach an assessment knowing that they've put in the effort and therefore they should actually be able to succeed. And yeah, Stephen unpacked some of the very Carol Dweck ideas of learning from failure, that it's not actually failure, it's just not yet. And if you view it as not yet, then it means that you have many opportunities to get something right when it should be 100% right. And so the last Dweck idea that I like, that I think contributes to this discussion about trust, is that Dweck says with a growth mindset, then you learn to enjoy the success of others. And I think that's something that's really important with our students. Assessment for them is all about an exercise in doing better than somebody else, and therefore their behaviors aren't conducive to group learning and helping each other. And that's not what we want healthcare professionals to be like. So yeah, I think enjoying the success of others is an important part of the assessment process. And we should be thinking about designing assessments that are tailor-made for students to show their own, to shine for themselves rather than just get a right answer. So
brilliant. So we need to be designing assessments, and we need to be designing the tools and our own teaching methodologies, our own ways in which Aviwa we can convince, we can build that meaning and understanding, and some of the failure, not failure, but just not yet, Shira, that you speak to could potentially be part and parcel of that approach, or that what we need tools that can instill in the students that thinking. Catherine, you're also very welcome.
Oh, thanks. Yes, it's been wonderful listening to these points and watching your extracts from the video, Richard. And that's what prompted my comment, which was coming from the place about trust, when colleagues trust each other. So we've talked a bit about students trusting their teachers and their professors and their lecturers and the people in the clinical environment. I'm sure we could say a lot more about that. It was very interesting listening to Aviwa and others. We've talked a bit about how we trust our students, this question of cheating, and obviously Janis and Shira and Stephen have brought up a whole lot of points there. But I'm also struck from your video also about the question of what colleagues have done with each other during this period. Perhaps this was bubbling up and happening already. And of course, there's always been good teamwork in certain pockets of our academic lives, and that's what's made it worthwhile. And many of us, channel that as a life goal to build more collegiality. But I've been struck, just like the professor that you showed with the video extract, Richard, that colleagues have worked together in a very much more collegial way than I'm even used to, not just across disciplines, but in teams. And I think that modeling behavior is also visible to the students a bit more. And we can go further, we can make it more visible so that we also say, oh gosh, I really don't know how to make that work, but my other colleague really knows how to make that work. Or this is an area of my expertise, but do you mind if I stay on the lecture for the next 45 minutes? Because I'd really like to learn how another colleague frames this critical issue. And I'm sure that can happen between even busy clinicians more than it does, let alone people like myself from a humanities background. I don't think it's completely pie in the sky to say that there's a way of showing that a university is where we're making knowledge across these different divisions, and no one is perfect and everyone is learning, and lots of people are making mistakes along the way. I've been very struck by how the Vice Chancellor of UJ, who is a highly published A-rated engineer, often talks about how much he's still learning and how many mistakes he makes in his knowledge, and how some publications that he's written in the past he needs to go back to, and how he's constantly pushed by his younger or more junior colleagues. And I think that that's showing that we are all learning, that we are failing and then doing better, and that we fail better the next time is a modeling between academics that I think is also really necessary.
Excellent. Thank you, Catherine. And we speak about tools that we need to create in this regard, and approaches and systems and the like, but the culture is so critical. And we've been speaking recently about having the looking for the opportunity that where the Vice Chancellor can come and speak to our students in the Nelson Mandela Fidel Castro program, because they're really struggling with the prospect of failure. And if we're trying to introduce workplace-based assessments, and they are struggling with even with such low-stakes assessments and the like, and getting feedback, they're not engaging around just making mistakes, and even in conversation. And our new Vice Chancellor, I think, is going to bring a real sense of a culture of humility around being just us all needing to grow and learn and work together. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to just in the last few minutes, I'm going to just take, if I may, just to wrap up our discussion. Allow me to take the conversation, just finish off in the last 2 minutes of Richard Fuller's AMY Symposium, that just perhaps won't allow us to discuss that much in the time allowed, but allow us to go away with some more thoughts, and we can take up the conversation again at another time.
Upgrade and amplify. Well, I think there are two areas to flag up, one of which is not an original thought because it was here before we hit the impact of COVID, but I think we have seen some interesting responses that, for me, really reinforce these messages, that it's thinking differently about what assessment is. We've had to focus much more on engagement of our learners and assessment for learning at a time where lots of high stakes tests have been abandoned. And it's thinking about what that data shows us, what it means, can we make things both programmatic and personalised? And our systems are about both competence and patient care, but also about learner development too. I'd also argue that recent experience has allowed us to rethink some of our relationship with technology. I think it's still at the stage where we see this as a delivery mechanism for established tools. But let's take a critical look at how we've been using technology over the last few months, if not before, in healthcare practice. A lot of us are video consulting. The Zoomathon is a part of everyday life here. We're using quite complex data sets to make decisions about care. We're using devices, technological devices, to deliver care. And our patients are part of that journey with us. If I look around my stroke unit, there are lots of people on iPads communicating with relatives, looking up information. Colleagues from elsewhere are actually dialing into the bedside to deliver care. we need to think about how our assessments actually capture that practice. And I think really fascinatingly, and I think this is something which I hope is here to stay and develop, is really testing at the top of any learning taxonomy, because we don't do it hugely well. How do we look at really complex patient problems and test them? The single best answer, the OSCE, only take us so far within that. And I think some of the focus in higher education more generally, but also from colleagues in the Netherlands and elsewhere who've been exploring open books, a real opportunity to look at these ideas of takeaway and open book tests and think about the infrastructure that we need to be able to move towards it. And a great paper in MedEd published by colleagues from Malaysia really exploring this. Where do we go from there? Well, let's reconceptualize what the open book is, and in fact, who the people are that answer it. Increasingly, we work in teams in practice. We should be looking at assessment that reflects that. And the open book, well, it's much more this. It's the smartphone. It's the thing we all have in our pockets that mean the world of knowledge is there for us to access. So let's build assessments around that. So where does that take?
And I'm going to pause there. We're at 16:59. To note that a couple of things from this, I mean, in those last few comments of by Fuller in this seminar, really picks up on some of the very points that have been made already by colleagues on this call. The technology enhanced assessment, the open book, the open book learning, the open book assessments that I think was mentioned by Yanis earlier. And if we time does not allow us to speak to have any detailed discussion further, because I do want to keep to time, colleagues. But I if anything is going to prompt you into perhaps looking at some of these very same articles that are referred to by Fuller in this presentation. Broussard's artificial intelligence surely tweaks your interest. It certainly does mine, and I haven't followed up on what that is in the context of the technology enhanced assessment. So perhaps we can look at that. But I think a couple of points to close off on. He mentions the programmatic and personalized approach to assessments. And maybe that's something that we can take forward and just reflect a little bit more on, and have some more engagements in these sessions just around what it means to be personalizing the issues, and that is in its broadest understanding and definition. Programmatic does also make sense, as we've alluded to, with regards to the building of competence pixels in both a formative or low-stakes summative fashion. So I would ask you as well, just to be mindful of the Ottawa consensus statements, the 2020 Ottawa consensus statements that came out. In fact, they've just come out. I've seen the performance assessment consensus statement out of the Ottawa conference in 2020. There are three. There's the performance assessment statement, there's the consensus statement, there's the programmatic assessment, and there is the technology enhanced assessment. And I think those, I suggest, I haven't seen all three of them, but I saw the previous ones of earlier years, and that helped me to understand a little bit as really still growing, needing to grow so much in this whole world of health professionals education. And I suggest humbly so that there might be three frameworks within which we can also situate our understanding and going forward. Can we have a session again on dedicated to trust and how we build that as one of our faculty development sessions going forward? I think it'll be worth it. I think it will, how does everything from WBAs in the undergraduate space to the fact that all the colleges of medicine are now looking at WBAs and entrustable professional activities, and really, as Vanessa Birch puts it, it is a question of trust, and that's been the main focus in the college's discussion around the introduction of workplace-based assessments. So that just leaves me then to say that two more things. One is that this very slide that you're looking at now, the Tina moment for assessment, there is no alternative. I'm going to be speaking to this and having another discussion around this particular article in a couple of sessions' time. So just to flag that, and that when we reconvene again in a couple of weeks around that session, of course, next week there is another session in the Tech Tuesday space, I think, Yanis, that we're going to be looking at engaging next week.
Yes.
So to flag that, thank you. And just to finish off, if I may, given that Shira came onto the call a little late, she's been busy with the QQR sessions for this as a panel member on behalf of with the School of Clinical Medicine QQR. And just a real big thanks to the Centre for Health Sciences Education and this partnership. We've all mentioned on the call today that we are just weaker alone and stronger in collaboration and working together on all of these very difficult and complex issues about how to improve ourselves in the interest of the outcomes of our students. So Shira, thank you very much to the Centre for your participation and endorsement and partnership on this particular online series. So thank you very much. And with that, colleagues, I wish you a good evening at 17:04, and I look forward to seeing you for another engagement at 4 o'clock next week.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.